Rumour and speculation spawned a variety of wild theories.
He will instigate ultimate fear.
A feature film suggested the whole affair was part of an extreme right-wing plot to destabilise the country.
I'm very pleased, Victor. 300,000 idiots marching in Brussels. An ocean of white balloons. Magnificent. Pathetic and impressive at the same time. We really got them exactly where we want them.
En op verzoek van de Kamervoorzitter, de heer Raymond Langendries.
To appease the public's concern, Parliament set up the Dutroux-Nichoul Commission.
Je propose à la Commission d'observer un moment de silence. Merci.
As the pressure grew more and more, they decided in a kind of panic climate to create the commission, because the political world had to try to find an answer.
But what the commission revealed was incompetence that beggared belief. Police had been told of Dutroux's plans to make money by kidnapping children. They had his house under surveillance throughout the abductions. They even searched inside and heard the sound of children, but failed to find the dungeon. What it established beyond doubt was that the girls could have been saved.
They had everything they needed to arrest Dutroux. That's the scandal of this affair. Dutroux was known. He had previous form. They had valid intelligence that he'd built the hiding place in the cellar for the little girls. There was information from Charleroi that the children could be at the house.
But when the Parliamentary Commission began to ask why, was it incompetence or had someone in authority protected Dutroux, cooperation with their investigation stopped.
It
was completely sabotaged to the point that all the work they did has been locked away in archives for 30 years. It was Parliament that voted that on itself. Can you imagine?
If the Commission's job had been to restore stability, to clear the air of insurrection, it worked. The danger to Belgium's establishment was over. But there was still no answer to the most important question. Was the catalogue of failures pure incompetence, or had Dutroux and his friends enjoyed protection? Were they protected?
On the question of protection, we didn't discover much, unless you count the best protection that Dutroux could have had. And that's the incompetence of Belgium's police and judicial system.
But Jean-Michel Nichoul, the man suspected of hiring Dutroux to kidnap children, was released from jail after just 5 months. It's still unclear if he'll ever come to trial, and some members of the Commission remain convinced he is protected.
We succeeded in demonstrating that Nichoul was really an artist in protection, really a specialized man in manipulating inquiries, policemen and judges. We had proofs about that.
Nichoul's release just left more unanswered questions for the families. The mother of Melissa, Karine Rousseau, has access to the legal evidence the court will bring against Dutroux. She's found no answers, nothing to clarify who stole, raped and killed her daughter. All charges Dutroux denies.
Oui, allô?
5 years on, there's still no admission from Dutroux. There's no material evidence, no witness statements which state that it was Dutroux who really kidnapped the children, who really raped them, and who really killed them.
It's a catastrophe because nothing is any more clear today. Nothing is clear.
The parents suspect Dutroux was not acting alone, that others were involved in abducting and hiding the girls. When he was briefly imprisoned for car theft in November 1995, Dutroux claims to have left the girls in his cellar, in this specially constructed cage with a little food and water. On his release, after nearly 4 months, Dutroux claims he found the children barely alive, that he tried to save them, but they died in his arms. But for the Rousseaus, this story can't be true.
Les 4 mois
4 months incarceration of 2 little girls of 8 years old in a cellar in the middle of winter.
en plein hiver.
But when I say cellar, it's a little hide built inside the cellar, so it's tiny, 3 meters by 2, even less.
3 mètres sur 2, cette cache, elle est toute petite. Il n'y a pas de fenêtre, je veux dire.
No windows, completely dark. They cut off the heating.
Pas de chauffage,
They cut the electricity and heat.
on est en plein hiver et elles n'ont pas de nourriture.
And no food. For 4 months. Then he says when he came out of prison 4 months later, they're still alive.
Enfin bon, c'est un exploit.
Well, then they're superhuman.
Inhumain, surhumain. On peut pas.
It's unimaginable, 2 children of 8 holding out.
Seuls.
Alone, with nothing to sustain them. No food, no heat, no human, no psychological contact, nothing. In a little cage like that for such a long time and survive.
Pendant autant de temps et survivre.
So how did they survive so long? Did someone else keep them alive? The Palace of Justice in Liège is the seat of one of Belgium's most powerful figures, Prosecutor General Anne Tilly, who's in charge of the case. She says there's no evidence to contradict Dutroux's version of how the children died. So how did the children survive so long, nearly 4 months, until Dutroux was released from prison?
No, Julie was dead.
Julie était morte.
Melissa was nearly dead, and then she died. I think it was the next day.
But Melissa, how could she have survived nearly 4 months?
Survive in what condition? In a lamentable state. She was so weak she could not get up. That's according to Dutroux, of course. No one else was there.
Dutroux was acting alone. This is the mantra repeated again and again in Belgium, with a certitude that for the victims' parents is inexplicable. They believe that investigators have blocked every lead, rejected every clue which would reveal that Dutroux was kidnapping girls for someone else. Most painful, perhaps, is the autopsy report which shows Melissa had been repeatedly raped about 2 weeks before her death, while Dutroux was in jail. So who raped this child? Dutroux denies he raped the girls. But isn't it simple to find out if Dutroux raped them or someone else, scientifically?
Normalement, oui. En principe, oui.
Normally, yes. In principle, yes.
Les analyses scientifiques élémentaires comme recherche d'ADN.
But in fact, the most elementary scientific tests, like DNA tests, the traces of the culprit on the body of the child, were just not done.
Sur les corps des enfants n'ont pas été faits.
Back in the Palace of Justice, they say the DNA tests were done, but the results were inconclusive. Can you explain why there was no DNA analysis done?
DNA analysis was done, madame.
And the results?
Nothing.
What does that mean, that there was no trace of sperm?
They were in a very putrefied state. It did not allow us to make an analysis of that type, of sperm or anything.
That's not what's written in the autopsy report. Again, the story doesn't square. The bodies weren't severely decomposed. DNA can be identified from samples taken long after death. The question remains unanswered. Why is there no DNA result? Might it have shown that someone else had raped Melissa? Other forensic tests that should have been routine were just not done. Human hairs collected from Dutroux's dungeon weren't sent for analysis. The logic was strange. They claimed that as there was no evidence anyone else had entered the cage, there was no need to analyse the hair. In 5 years, Connerott's successor has shed no light on the abduction, imprisonment or death of the girls. Jacques Langlois refused to be interviewed.
Langlois don't believe in a sort of network. For Langlois, the Dutroux is the only one who used the girls. For Langlois, it's simple. There's one raper, Dutroux, and close the case.
By the spring of 1997, evidence of a paedophile network linked to the Dutroux affair was emerging from the testimony of the ex-witnesses. Regina Louf had provided investigators with details of her childhood abuse, which they'd begun to check.
In one of her testimonies, she explained how a certain person had been murdered in a certain place. So we went to look for that case, that old case. She described it, where it happened, more or less.
I remember it like it's a film in my head. I can close my eyes and see every little detail of that house where she was murdered.
Regina Louf described a house where in 1984 she said she saw the torture and murder of a young girl. The house was connected to an underground mushroom farm. The building has since been demolished, but Rudy Hoskin's team identified it and matched Regina's story to an unsolved murder, that of 15-year-old Christine Van Hees.
She gave us some details that made us think it's impossible to give without having been there at that place, or without having lived that. In the way the body was found at that time and the way she described the person was killed. There were some things that were similar.
It was a sort of bondage, so her legs and her hands and her throat were connected with the same rope, and when she moved, she strangled herself, yeah.
The credibility of Regina Louf's testimony hinged partly on whether she really knew the house where Christine Van Hees was killed. This man grew up there, though his family sold it before the murder. It was two houses knocked into one, with a unique passage of stairs and corridors. No one, he says, could describe it unless they'd been there.
There was the corridor here between the two houses, and she drew a picture of the doors inside. They were antique doors, and she drew the mouldings. She described the wallpaper and the front step. I don't know how she could have described it all so faithfully if she'd never entered the house. I don't know Regina Louf. I've never even met her. All I know is, from her description of the house, of the mushroom farm, my brother and I agreed. I'm sure, it's certain she entered the mushroom farm. It's certain.
The police were now convinced they were onto something, that Regina Louf's testimony was credible. What's more, it gave them a new link between Marc Dutroux and the man accused of being his boss, Jean-Michel Nihoul. In the year before her death, Christine Van Hees was a regular visitor to the Brussels ice rink, where Marc Dutroux also went. He'd already been banned from the rink in Charleroi, where he was notorious for molesting girls. The manager remembers it well.
And then I saw him with a young girl who was up against the lockers like this. And Dutroux, who was in front of her with his hands all over her, like this. So I grabbed him and pulled him back and brought him over here. At that moment, my father-in-law turned up, and when he found out what was happening, he wanted to hit him. So I grabbed his arm, otherwise he would have punched him.
When she wasn't skating, Christine Van Hees used to spend time in the building of a pirate radio station. It belonged to Jean-Michel Nihoul. Both men, Dutroux and Nihoul, were at Christine Van Hees's murder, according to Regina Louf.